We'll do a review on Likutei Sichos in Chelik Lamed Gimel. This is a this is the third Sicha for the Parshas Korach. It's a very lumdisha Sicha in which the Rebbe discusses the meaning that when you give Terumah, the pasuk says that you need to give the best, so that when you separate, it has to be chelboy. If you give chelboy means the fat, the good, then you will not be sinning. Meaning, if you don't give the best, you don't give the chelboy, then you're doing a sin. So it means you could, it does apply if you did not give from the best. The Terumah that you gave, the separation that you did, worked, but it would be a chait. The question, the debate is, the Rebbe is trying to analyze and figure out, is there a difference between the Bavli, the Talmud, and the Sifrei? In the Sifrei, what it looks like, in the Sifrei, the prohibition in which you would be a sin would be any time that you don't do the best. So let's, for the sake of now, a person has three categories of grain: the best, the middle, and the least. So according to the Sifri, the mitzvah is from each kind, you always got to pick the best. Whatever you're doing has to be the best. If you don't give the best, then you're doing a sin. According to the Bavli, it seems, the Rebbe will bring out, that the only sin is to give bad ones for the good ones, which means if you shall give the least grade, the ziburis, and you will give that truma for the idis, that would be a sin. But if you give from the Beinunis for the Beinunis, or from the ziburis for the ziburis, the idis, if you give within each kind, you don't have to give the best. The only thing is what is included in the prohibition. What the Torah means, chel boy, the best, according to the Sifri, it means of your whole possession, all of your grain. Any part of your grain that you're giving, whatever you're giving truma of, you always have to give the best. According to, and if you don't, you're violating the loisisol of chet. According to the Babli, according to the Talmud, no, you don't have to give the best. You can only not give the raw on the bad for the good. The Rebbe will conclude at the end, after the whole debate, that in the Talmud there's a difference between the positive, the mitzvah, and the mitzvah is taka to give the best of everything. That's the mitzvah lechatchila. But according to the Talmud, the prohibition will only be if I give bad, uh, and I'm separating for the good, and I'm giving away the koyin. You're giving him bad, and you're keeping for yourself the good. That's when the prohibition. But according to the Sifri, even if you're not keeping yourself, uh, you're not giving the bad, but you're keeping yourself better than the kohen, you would still be a prohibition. Let's look inside. It's very detailed, and Bezras Hashem will go through step by step. Aleph. Al haposik b'siyum parshosenu. On the verse at the end of our parsha, it says, "V'loi sisu olav chet," and you shall not carry a sin when you perform the mitzvah of Terumah. Baharimchem as chelbei mimenu. When you raise and you separate the best from the tevuah that you have, you must give the best. So Isa b'sifri. So what does the Sifri say? Minayin ata oimer. So how do we know? She'im hifrashtem oisoi shaloi min hamuvchor. If you separated the terumah and you did not give the mufchar means the choicest. You did not give the choicest. Sha'atem b'nisiyas oven. So then you will be carrying a sin. That's a violation if you don't give the best. How do we know this? Talmud loymar v'loy sisu olav chet. That's what the pasuk says. You shall not carry a sin because you are separating the best of it. So if you don't give the best, then you do have a sin. So here we see the Sifri is talking about giving the best. It's not giving it. We have to give if you don't give the best to the Kohen, even though you didn't give him the worst, but if you don't give him the best from whatever you have, you are going to be violated. That's what it seems like. We'll see. The Rebbe will explain. But what does it say in the Gemara? The Gemara says differently. In the Gemara, it specifically says if you give the Kohen the bad. So it looks like as long as you don't give the Kohen the bad, if you give him less than what you keep for yourself, that's not necessarily going to be included in loisisu olav chet. You won't carry a sin. Let's look inside. Ubi Gemara Amru. How does the Gemara say? The Gemara says like this. Omar Rabbi Eloi, says Rabbi Eloi, Minayin letoirem min haro al hayofe shetrumosei truma. Where do we know the halacha if one should separate from the bad of his field, of his grain, on the good, which means he keeps himself the good. He separates to give the kohen, he gives the bad. How do we know that it's okay? Maybe it should not even qualify as truma. So truma. How do we know that it's truma? The ksiv, since the verse states, that you shall not carry and have a sin when you raise the best of it. Meaning that if you will give, as the Gemara says, the bad, not the best, but you'll give the bad to the kohen, the truma, then you'll have a sin. But if you're not allowed to give it and it's not going to apply, that the truma is not going to be truma, why will you have a sin? You didn't do anything because in the end of the day, it didn't apply. So that means from here we see that it rests, that it does become truma. The problem is you're going to get a sin if you do that. So he says like this, Rashi says, but if you don't raise it and give the truma from the best, from the choices, tisuchet, you'll carry a sin. This is Rashi explains. So the Gemara proves, what's the proof? Be'im ein kodesh, if you're going to say that it doesn't become kodesh, when you gave the bad for the yafa, for the good, why would you be carrying a sin? We have to say that your separation from the bad on the good works, and the truma, the kohen gets to keep the bad because it worked. How do we know? Because we're saying you're going to have a sin if you give this to the kohen, and if it didn't apply, if you can't give bad for good, and you can't, and the kohen will not it doesn't end up being truma, so you didn't do anything, so there's no sin there. So imein kodesh nischet lama. Mikan. So over here we know, we see L'toira min hara layofa shetruma sitruma, that one who separates from the bad for the good, the truma is a truma. The Gemara uses the lashon, one who separates bad for the good. Meaning, the kohen you give bad, and for yourself you keep the good. It doesn't say that for the kohen you don't give the choicest. It says the kohen you're giving the bad, and for yourself you're giving the good. So according to the Gemara, it seems to say that you're only going to be violating if you gave yourself the good and the kohen you gave the bad. But if you gave the kohen the middle, not the bad, you wouldn't be violating. We don't have that in the Gemara. The Gemara seems to specifically say you can't give the kohen the bad and keep yourself the good. But we don't have to give in the Sifrei. Let's look at the Gemara in the Rebbe. The Rebbe explains it. It appears that there is a disagreement between the Gemara and the Sifrei. In the Gemara, it only talks about a prohibition to separate from bad on good. That's what it talks about. There's no discussion about separating medium for good. Doesn't seem that's included. The Gemara talks about bad for good. And the same thing is if you're giving bad, you can give him bad. You don't have to give the best of the bad. Isur litroim min hara al hara, that there is no prohibition to give, if you're not giving him the good, you're not keeping yourself the good, you don't have to, you can give the kohen the bad and keep yourself the bad. You don't have to give the choicest. So you have the medium to the medium. As long as you're not giving bad for good. Meaning, if you have good, you can't give the kohen bad. But if you have middle, I'm not saying give him bad, but because if you only have middle, that would not, but from the middle itself, you don't have to give the best of the middle, or you don't have to give the best of the best. Or the bad. There only is you can't give for the bad. You can't give bad for the good. As opposed to in the language of the Sifrei, it's very clear. The Terumah needs to be min hamuvchar, needs to be the choicest. You always have to make sure that the Terumah is min hasheiches, from the choicest. So you can't even give Ra for Ra, Beinunis for Beinunis. You always have to give the choicest within each of the category. It's not only a prohibition against giving Ra, giving and keeping yourself the Yafa. That's not the only prohibition. This is also appears like this, the language of the Sifrei earlier, al haposik, Baharimchem eschel boy mimenu. The pasuk says, when you raise the chel menu, v'nechshav lalevim. This is the earlier pasuk before that also says barimchem. Over there, it's talking about when the Levi separates the Trumas Meiser, of the Meiser that he received, that he gives the Terumah. So he says, Ba'adimchem eschel boy mimenu. you take the best. Again, the Torah is instructing the Levi that he should give the best of the grain to the Kohen. So it says v'nechsh lavim goyim. So what does Rashi? What does the Sifrei say there? Harezu hazhora. This is a warning. Shelo yehei torimin oisay ela min hamufchar. You have to only separate from the choicest. So what are we really saying over here? That according to the Sifrei, there's a mitzvah to always give from the choicest. Are we saying if you only have, according to the Sifrei, if you only have Beinonis, so how are you going to give the choicest? Are we telling you go ahead and buy a better grain and give the kohen the better one because you always have to give the choicest? No. Even though, even according to the Sifrei, we're saying now, if he has but the average, that's the grain that he possesses. Oiro, he has an inferior grade of grain. Harechiyuv hatruma chal rak al hapelis sheyeshloi. The obligation of Terumah is only on the fruit that he has, that from that fruit he has to give Terumah. He doesn't have to go in the store to go ahead and give Mufchar to the Kohen. We shall not obligate him to go and get the beautiful ones so that he can fulfill the mitzvah to separate it from the choicest. He only has Beinonis, he only has them. So, what does it mean? Even according to the Sifrei, if he has Beinonis, we're not going to make him buy anything better than that. Just like we're saying, according to the Gemara, he doesn't have to bechlal go. He just can't give bad for good. But the difference will be between the Sifrei and the Talmud. Let's say a person has good high level and the low level. He doesn't want to give all together. He wants to each category give them their own Terumah. If he's going to do the whole thing together, yes, doesn't make a difference. Even according to the Sifrei, he has to give the choice. Yes, so he has to give from the better grade. Just like you can't give from the less on the better one, just like the Sifrei and the Gemara, the same thing. However, in a case where a person has yesh la'odom tvua yafo tvua ra, he wants to go the bad and each category. Min hayof ala yofa, min ara ala ra, from the good and the good and from the bad and the bad. So he's not going to be giving mufchar, but he is going to not giving ra either. So according to the Gemara, that's okay. So the shittas hashachas ain't bekach isur. There's no isur because you are not giving the best. You're not giving the idis. We're not talking about within the kind. We're not going there. We're talking about within the different categories of fruit that you have, as opposed to, I'm not saying within the category itself, but so what we're saying is over here that according to the Gemara, Shalishita Sas Ein B'kach Isur, there's no prohibition here. Why? You don't have to give more as long as you're not giving from the bad on the good. So the bad is almost fine. That's according to the Gemara. However, Mashenkin la Sifri, according to Sifri, you have to give from the choicest. You can't give from the bad on the bad. You have to give only uh, from the. You have to give a bed. You have to give the mufchar. So while we won't make you buy it in the street, but if you own it, you have to give the mufchar. You can't just give each category by itself, because then you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of giving it from the choicest. And giving it from the choicest, according to the Sifri, means giving the better one. So the Terumah always has to be the better of what you own. You don't have to go out and buy it, but of what you own, you have to give the better one. So the Rebbe says that seemingly from and the Rebbe is going to debate this, but the Rebbe says that seemingly from the Gemara, there's a problem in giving bad for good, but you can give good for good and bad for bad. It's not a problem, because you can't give bad to the kohen and keep the good. But that's the whole prohibition. But according to the Sifri, you have to give the mufchar all the time. So in the case that the Rebbe brings, when you have the best and the worst, Idis and Ziburis, according to the Gemara, give each one on its own. That's fine. You don't have to give the best. You don't have to, as long as it's not Yofa Minara. But according to the Sifri, you're not giving a mufchar, so that means okay. The Rebbe says, with this approach, we can explain another change in the language of the Sifri, which differs from the language of the Gemara. Sifri haloshin sheloi min hamufchar, uses the loshin not of the choicest, to give the kohen not of the choicest, or layu torimin oisoi elamin hamufchar, only from the choicest. He uses the word choicest, the best, he's not doesn't use the word bad or good. He uses the word the highest level that you have. The loikit loshen hashas, unlike the language that is used in the Gemara, alayofe. The Gemara uses loshen alayofe. So why is that? Because b'shas in the Gemara had goshe il hachilukim b'tiv hatvua v'hapedus. In the Gemara, the emphasis is at the distinction on the grade, how good the grain and how good the fruits are. Im heim rois or yofis. We need to know, are they good or they're bad? Because you can't do bad for good. So we need to know it's good or bad. That's why he says beautiful as opposed to bad. Like we find how much truma one gives, so we find ayin yofa. Also, we use the word yofa, a nice eye, a beinanis oira, or bad. So over here, we're discussing the quality, the grade of the tavua, or the fruit, because according to the Talmud, according to the Shas, you cannot give a grade which is raw on the tvua, which is yof. Mash'enken kavonas sifri, as opposed to the intent of the Sifri, you're always obligated to separate from the best. We're not defining here what's good or bad because we don't need to know what's good or bad. We just need to know that you always got to give the best you have. V'hainu, shegam k'shetoida min hayofa ala yofa, even when you do separate from the good on the good, hadei mibein hayofes gufa tzorich litrim esamuvchar b'yoser. So amongst the beautiful ones, he also has to be separating the best one because according to the Sifrei, always you got to do the best. V'lochein nokat muvchar. That's why I use lashon choicest. Al derech haloshon eitzel korbanos. This is similar to korbanos. Tzorich liyis. Whatever korban, it always needs to be tamimim whole, no defects, no mum. Umuvchorim, the choicest. Over there, what does it mean, the choicest? It means the best animal that there is. Mina muvchar. So again, the Rebbe is presenting here that according to the Talmud, it's specifically don't give bad for good. According to the Sifrei, always give the best what you have. Not about bad or good, only the best what you have. And the Rebbe now in the bracket also says that the reason for this distinction is because how they translate the pasuk. Yesh loymar, and we can say, Shahasifri yoliv din ze meloshen hakosuf chel boy mimenu. Sifri learns this halacha because the pasuk uses the language, the best, the chelav, mimenu, from him. Why does it say chel boy mimenu? What is it chel boy, the best? The lechayre tevas mimenu meyuteres seems to be extra. Should give the best. And we see this, that the Sifri actually makes note when there's an extra word mimenu, because li'ila la posik v'harei moisem mimenu. So again, it says mimenu, from him, from the grain. Why does it say mimenu? The Sifri darshans. Mimin al minoi v'loi mimin al she'enei minoi. You have to give mimenu from him, that the Terumah needs to be from the same kind. You can't give a different kind of grain for another kind, or a different fruit for another fruit. You can't do that. You have to give mimenu from the fruit that you're separating from. Shemefarish mimenu miminoi. So in our pasuk, we don't have a drasha from the Sifri, but we see the Sifri's thinking. Yesh loymar. So based on this, we can say, Shalisifri hapirush bechelbe mimenu. What does it mean over here when the pasuk says chelbe mimenu? Hainu shegam im hu miminoi. Even if it's the same kind, it is yofe, it is ra. Chelbe mimenu, even miminoi, from its kind, it still has to be the best. Tzorech liyas min hamuvchar shaboy, needs to be the choicest of that category, wherever he has. You have to give the best of the office itself. So in this ois, the Rebbe lays the ground for a difference between the Bavli and the Sifri. According to the Shas, according to the Gemara, you're not allowed to give bad for good, but bad for bad, good for good, a lesser grade, middle for middle, it doesn't make a difference. As long as it's not bad and you're giving the bad and keeping yourself the good. But according to the Sifri, it has nothing to do with your general. It goes in everything that you give for any kind, wherever you're giving, you always need to give the best. Now, the Rebbe is going to say this halacha that we're saying in the and the Gemara needs to be explained, because it seems that we have other Gemaras, other sources that very clearly say that it's not only that you cannot give the bad for good, but within good or within bad, you can always have to give the best, as the Rebbe continues to explain in Ois Base. So in Ois Base, the Rebbe now shows that even in the Talmud and the Mishnah, it is almost clear evidence that one has to give the best, not only bad against good is prohibited, but even in the Gemara, we see that even from bad or from within each category, you always have to give the best. It seems very clearly. In the language over there, the Rebbe debates, the Rebbe explains all of the languages so that it will come out that there's no really disagreement, that also the Bavli holds you always have to give the best. And the reason why it only says not to, that the sin will give, not to give the raw on the yafa, is because of the chiddush that if you've done it, it's still Terumah. Let's look inside. Very, very fine, but very, very clear. Base. We have to look into, can we really explain the Hashas Polig al Hasifri Boze, that the Shas disagrees with the Sifri, that you always have to give the Mufchar, not only not to give bad when on good. Because there is a very clear Mishnah in Terumah. The Mishnah says, Kol mokim sheyesh koyin, if the koyin is available, it says Toida min hayofe. So it's not talking about the Ra or anything else. You always have to give the Yafet. Yafet must mean here Mufcha. We're not talking about if there is. Over there, the question is sometimes the better doesn't last as long as something which is inferior. So the Mishnah says that if there is a kohen available, so then you give the beautiful. And over there, it's not giving it, it's beautiful on its own, mufchar, which means not talking about on the bed. You have to give the most beautiful because it's miskayim, it lasts. Verak kishein kohen, if there is no kohen. So it turns out if you're going to give the better one, it's not going to last. So you still have to hold on to it till you find the kohen. So then it says, Toidem min hamiskayim. Then you give the Terumah from what lasts, because the better one, it's not going to last. The kohen is not going to get it. So you have to, but other than that, you take from the better one. That's the opinion of the Tanakama, the Das Rabbi Yehuda. And according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, even if it loses out, that it's going to get ruined, you always give only from the good. So here we're not talking about, we see that there is an obligation to do the yafa, not only because you're doing it against the Ra, but the obligation is to do the yafa itself. So we have to therefore say, we're forced to say, that also according to the view of the Gemara, the obligation that you have to make sure to give the best. It's not just a prohibition not to give from the raw, from bad on the good, as the Rebbe was trying to say, but there is an obligation to give from the yafa, like the mufcha, like in the Sifrei. And another Mishnah, also in the other Mishnah, in Mishnah Vav, the chol she'enoi kilayim b'chaveroi. If these two species, these two kinds that you're giving one from the other, as long that they're not kilayim, they're not a mixture that is prohibited. So toida min hayofa al hara. He says you can give Terumah from the Yafa on the Ra. Hare. So what do we see? Shachiyuv litroi min hayafa. So what does it mean when we say give from the good? Meaning min hayafa al hara. So that you're going to give the best of the Ra. If we're saying that you're only not allowed to give Ra for Yafa, but here we say that you need to give the Yafa, you can give the Yafa al Ra. Meaning that it's a mitzvah to give Yafa. Even though you're not doing it, you're not giving Ra against Yafa like we were learning the Shas now. So there's a mitzvah, Litrim min Yafa, Pirushay min Yafa al Hara, that there is a chiyuv to give from the good for the bad, but ve'ein Terumah min Hara al Hara. Why does it say min Yafa al Hara? Should give min the Ra, according to Shas, you can give Mera Lara too, according to the previous Svara. So therefore, we have clear evidence from this Mishnah as well that Mufchar means to give always the Yafa. And you give it better than the Ra. Well, this Mishnah is not so simple. Because if we look in the words, here we see that to give better means, in all cases, give better. You need to be mufchar like the Sifrei. Not only not to give bad for good, but even giving always good even for bad. That's what we see over here. However, if you look clearly in the Mishnah, it almost seems to say the other way around. Because Ivra, in truth, Shebe Mishnah Shom Mamshich, in the Mishnah over there, he continues, Toirem min hayofe al hara. That's the first sentence. But it says also, Avoloi min hara al hayofe. But you can't give min hara al hayofe. So the question becomes, why doesn't it say, if it's true, you always have to give the mufchar? Why doesn't it say only not from the Ra and the Yafa? Don't give the Ra and the Ra either. You can't, because you always have to give the mufchar according to the Sifrei. So why does the Mishnah continue over there? Avaloi min hara ala Yafa. If it's true that also according to the Mishnah that the Ra cannot be given for the Ra because you always need mufchar, so why does it say lo min hara ala Yafa? Should lo min hara ala Ra? Vapi anal haveli l'tana loy marak avaloi min hara, and not say loy min hara ala Yafa, loy min hara, because you can't give from the Ra and the Yafa, you can't give the Ra and the Ra. So Ozar is a koilel, then it would include gam loy min hara ala Ra, also not from Ra to Ra. Umash malichayre, so it seems it would comes out shar ha'isur hurak min hara ala Yafa, that the Isur is only from the bad and the Yafa. That's why from the second sentence, it says, don't give from the Ra and the Yafa. So that's like the previous thought, what the Gemara says. But the Rebbe says, no. From this is not a proof. From this is not a proof because there's a reason you can possibly say why he says, Lo min hara ala Yafa. And that is because he wants to tell you that if you did do it, it's still going to be Terumah. We're not trying to teach you what you're not allowed to do, because what you're not allowed to do, it would be better for him to say you're not allowed to even do the Ra for the Ra. But he's trying to tell you that after you did it, it's still going to be okay. And there, the Chiddush is even though you gave from the Ra and the Yafe, which is terrible. And still it's gonna. Avol yesh loymar, but we can say that Rebbe answers the whole shenokat Tana. This that the Tana uses avoloy min hora al hayofe, not from the bad and the good. Humach mas hemshech devorov. That's because of the continuation of the words of the Tana. It says im Torah min hara al hayofe. If he did do it, shouldn't do it. The Terumah Terumah. So he's mainly giving you the scenario because of the hemshech that if he did it, the Terumah Terumah. Lo chen nokat min hora al hayofe. And that's why he said Mineral Yofa to teach us a novelty. Not not to say that you can only not give around the Yofa, you can also not give around for Rab. But the Chiddush is that if you did give around on the Yofa, you're still going to be Truma. Even in such a kazeh. Not only didn't he do from the good, extreme case, Aval lechatchila asurim litroim, but lechatchila you're not allowed to be toidim. Loi rak minara la yofe, elo minara afilu minara la ra. So there is no raya from the continuation. And the Rebbe says, and this is also going to explain the Gemara, Rabbi Loi, that we were medayik before. He doesn't say mufchar. He says, like in the Sifrei, he says only not to do the ra for the Yofa, not because that's the only Aveda to do the Rav the Yofa, because of the part that if you did do it in such a case, still it's going to be Truma. It's also the reason why in the Gemara Rabbi Loi mentions the case Toire min haro ala Yofa, that if you separate from the bad for the good, we have the sin. The loy kiloshen hasifri, not using the language of the sifri. Shehafrashosem oiser shaloi, shifrashtem oiser shleim. You didn't do from the choices. Why doesn't he say that you need to do the choices, but rather he says not from the raw and the offer? We don't have to say this is a disagreement. The reason for the changes, because Rabbi Loi is trying to teach us his intent. And Loi etzem hadin shu b'nesiyas chet. Not the din that is a nesiyas chet by giving the ra, because that would be even, if you don't give mufchar, you have already nesiyas chet. El hadin shu trumah truma. He wants to tell you that it's truma. That after the fact it remains truma. There's a greater novelty that even if you separate from the ra, the toiv, and still at the end it's good. But the Sifrei isn't coming to teach us about after the fact that it's truma. And he's telling you what, that there is a sin. Stop. Because of that's why he writes not from the choices, because Shazoh Chidush. The Chidush over there is you always have to be the best, not only Rada. Not only, of course, if you did Minara ala Yafa, but even if you didn't do Mina Mufchar, Yeshalov Nesinas Oven is a carrying a sin. So the way the Rebbe concludes, really, even though for a moment it seemed in the Mishnah itself, from the scenario, Ra al Hayafa would seem that the Shas does disagree. The Mishnah disagrees with the Sifrei, but the Rebbe explains why it is saying Rabbi Law. When we're talking about the halacha, that even after the fact, it's okay. We want to tell you a big chiddush, even though you did an extreme from Ra ala Yof, it's still okay. But in the Sifrei, which is talking about when is there a sin, he tells you not only if Ra ala Yof, anytime you do it, not mina mufchar, there is an asinas chez. As the Rebbe will continue to show that there is still a difference, that this is the between the Talmud and the Sifrei. Gimel, the Rebbe is going to say, no, it's very difficult, the Rebbe says in the Gemara, to say that according to the Gemara, it's actually on the same, that the only reason that we're saying minha yofe, minarala yofe, is not because that's the only prohibition, but it's only because b'di'evet, because all the cases when the Gemara uses can't do from the Rod Yofa is not talking about the b'di'evet case, so it's more than that. Also, the Rebbe is going to try to learn the language of the Ramban, the Ramban, and there too the Rebbe debates exactly whether it is. The Rebbe is actually noted that the Ramban learns that there is no Isser, and of course we have to deal with the Mishnahs that the Rebbe quoted from Terumah, where it seems that you could be you should be Torah min hayofa ala ra, so even that cases. And the Rebbe will be machalik between the Isser and Lechatchel. But let's look inside Gimel. It's difficult to explain such the view of the Talmud that the Emerson you're not allowed to take anything less, not only for Yofa, but always have to be for the best. And the only reason we explained, why does the Rambam, why does the Gemara say from Yofa, Ra and the Yofa, the Chiddush is that even then it's Trumah is Trumah. So the Rebbe says it's hard to say that. It's difficult to explain, so that's the view of the Gemara. Because in all places that we find Mishnah Gemara Nemar, it doesn't say it always says loy min hara layofa. Can't give bad and good. It never says that you have to give the best or you can't give media. Always ra on the yofa. From one kind that which is considered bad on another kind which is considered good. Even though in these places it's not mentioned in Terumah. Doesn't say that it's Terumah, umashma. So therefore it appears the issue is only around Yafa because always the Gemara uses around Yafa. This excuse that we explained Rabbi Loi and we explained the word of the Mishnah, that it's because of the Chiddush that after the fact it's still going to be Terumah, but all those cases aren't talking about b'di'evet Terumah, and still it only says can't give the Ra on the Yafa, but there's no other thing to say there's an Isur to give a lesser grade if it's not Ra for something less than that. And the Rebbe wants to bring a very clear wording of the Ramban. We can derive this from the language that Rambam uses when he challenges, in his challenges on the Sefer HaMitzvah Rambam. He adds in the minyan of the positive mitzvahs. So he says, "Shenitztavinu b'afrishenu truma." The Eibishter has instructed us when we separate truma, "Shenafrish oiso min hayofer." We should give it from the best, oy min hashove, or equal, loy min hara layofer. He says very clearly, equal is okay. You don't need the best. Torah says us we have to give the best, but not or equal. Loy min hara al hayofer. So that seems to say clearly, like we're learning in the Gemara originally, that can't only not give rayof. And also such the Ramban adds in the number loisasa. He also says shenimnu halevim sheyorimu min hamaiser anitin lahem, that the Levim should refrain when they raised Truma from the Meiser that was given to them, Trumas Meiser, they shouldn't give min harashaboy. Avol yorimu biyafa b'shava. They need to give it either better or equal. Equal is good. No mufchar there. Not to carry the sin when you raise the chel b'menu. So it almost seems very clearly that that's what the Rambam learns, but not 100%, because maybe when the Rambam says equal, he means equal but no worse. But if you have just middle ones, that should be okay. So let's look inside. In the Likutei, we don't have to. It's not necessarily proof that that's what the Ramban said, because Likutei yesh lefarish kavonas Ramban b'mashakosu. Likutei we can explain what the Ramban writes. Oy min hashove, oy b'shove, which is in the mitzvah saseh. He used the words min hashove. In the loy saseh he uses oy b'shove. Shehachiyu litroi min hayofe shoyle l'ra kafroshe min hara. When we say to do the good, that only negates not to give from the bad. That's the isur to give the bad. Avol mutter lahafrish min habenuni. But from the middle one, you're allowed to. So we don't have the mitzvah is to do best as opposed to bad, but not as opposed to middle. Middle ground would be okay. That's not included. So when one does the middle, he's not violated it, because the Torah never wants him to do best. Means best or middle or equal. This would be similar to the din mufcharim bekorban when we do a mufchar by a korban. That's the halacha. That watch a noise of lekach shegam im eine mufcharin nifsul bekach. Besides the fact that if it's not the choice, not the best, it doesn't become possible the korban. Hinegam geder the mufchar shechayovim lahavi lechatchila. So what is the definition when we say you need the best? You're not allowed to bring a lean and a disgusting, a bad. That means choices. Choices doesn't mean the top of the line. It means not bad. Choices mean not bad. But there's no obligation. The Rebbe says, we don't have to, not obligated to bring from the best. So we see we're only saying, it's not that the only Isser is to give from Ra on Yofeh, but there's no mitzvah to give in a Mufchar. No, there is a mitzvah to give in a Mufchar. The only thing is, Benoni is called Mufchar, because as we see by the Karbonis, that's Mufchar. So when you give the Shavim, means Benoni, basically. Also in the Gemara, he sends the Shaliach, and the Shaliach goes. The question is, was he happy with what the Shaliach does? Because he says to the Shaliach, Klach etzel Yofes, I sent you to separate you, going entirely by the beautiful ones. And we're saying the Stam, the Gemara says there, the Balabais Kitorim, me Beinonis Utorim. The Balabais gives from the Beinonis. So that's the middle. That's considered Mufchar. Beinonis is Mufchar. And also, in other words, so there we see people give the middle one. That's called the Mufchar. The Gemara says elsewhere, Vari Toira min hara al hayofa. But he would end up being from the doing the bad and the good. The Rachman Omer Mikol B'Chelboi. The Torah says should be the fat. Chelboi ein giruin loy. Chelboi means good, but it doesn't mean best has to be best. Just not diminishing, not to be kochosh, not to be kor, not to be a lesser level, but it doesn't mean that you need to be the best. So a Beinoni really qualifies as the best. That's part of what we're talking about. So when the Rambam says B'Shavim, He means the Benoni. He means that's the middle, and that's okay. Sharak Geru Nosur. So from the Gemara, we say from that Gemara, we say only Gerus Osur. But the Rebbe says, why does the Ramban use the Lashon Shove? We need to understand the language of the Rambam. What does he say? Oymin Hashove. The Lecheda Pianal, if according to the above, that it's because that is Mufchar, is the Benoni, is Mufchar, Havle Linkut Kiloshin Hashas, Oymin HaBenoni. You should have used the language of the Gemara, the Benoni. So therefore, it's not Staber Yosel Lefarish Loshin Rambam, Oymin Hashove. It makes more logical to explain when he says or of the equal that if the truma and what you left over, the separation from what you're leaving over, are equal, there's no problem. If you are in the same category, you can give separation. You don't need the better ones. Because it's only the bad for the good. That's what the Ramban. From the Ra, in the Loisase, he says, so he doesn't mean only the Rash. Rashaboy doesn't mean to say that just you can't do Ra. But Rashaboy, Hanishashiraim Einam Ra, it's not because it'll be Ra Yofa. That's the regular halacha of the Shas that we were trying to say. So he's not coming to say that only Ra is that not only Ra is prohibited, because he says Mina Rashaboy. Rashaboy means that the Shiraim are not Ra, and therefore he is going to be toited from the Yofa the Ra. If they're equal, there's not going to be an Isur. As the Rebbe argued before, not like the Sifrei that you need always the Mufchar, is still not going to be an Isur. And the Rebbe actually says that, so the debating is over here. Did the Rambam really mean to say that there is only a prohibition of Ra against Yofa? Because the Rambam seems to say that Shabbat b'Shabbat is okay, and the Rebbe tried to say that maybe we could explain that what it means. Shabbat b'Shabbat means that's only the Beinoni, but the Rebbe says no, it's mashma that according to the Ramban, there's only a problem Ra on Yofa, but not within the category itself. There's not a problem because the Ramban holds there's no Isur against only Ra Yofa. That's L'Shisuchot is only in that case. And the Rebbe says, V'yesh Lahoisif, we can add, Shagam im timtzalei meshakavonas harambam be'oimen hashove. Even if he does mean he should metorim litrim in a Beinoni, you can give him the Beinoni because Beinoni also qualifies. It's not considered to be not mina mufchar. How does that l'chayret like Shitas HaSifrei now? But it still doesn't go like the Sifrei. Shakosa beferish she mefrashtem oiso shaloi mina mufchar. He says very simply this: if you didn't do it from the choicest, then you are carrying a sin. or azhara shelo tor min Israel min hamuvchar. The warning is only min hamuvchar. But according to the Ramban, Beinani is also fine. The Sifrei doesn't buy, is not accepting. Can't say in the Sifrei, like we're trying to say in the Ramban, that Beinani is also good, because in the Sifrei you say beferish if it's not mina mufchar or only mina mufchar, and you were saying here now, oh, you can give the Beinani also. Beinani is also called mufchar. But loymar shekavanose lishlel rak ra. Mufchar means not bad. Adrabe, pastus mashmos sifrihi, in the Sifri's mashma, the gamk shetoyre min hayofa, tzorich litre min hamufchar shebiyof gufa. Even if you're doing from the yofa, you needed the yofa themselves. Can al sifalef. I said earlier sifalef. So the Rebbe, after this whole thing, I know this is like picking the brain back and forth, but the bottom line is the Rebbe is saying, according to the Sifri, whether you're giving Yafes, Beinanis, always you gotta give the top of the line within the category itself. According to the Ramban, even if you explain that Ramban means that Beinanis are okay, that's what it means by Shavis, but still it doesn't go. According to the Sifri, that wouldn't go, because you can't give Beinanis. Even on Beinanis, you have to give the better kind, according to the Sifri. The Ramban wouldn't hold like the Sifri anyways. But the Rebbe says it's mashma from the wording, because he uses the Loshen Shove, Beinis, that L'chatchila, the whole Isser is Yofe on Ra and nothing else. But if it's Shove, then it's okay. It doesn't have to be Mufchar. Pianal, Yesh Loimar, Shemekoirish al Ramban B'Shem Sashasanal. Based on the word, maybe this, the source of the Ramban is in the languages of the Gemara. Rabbi Loi, the very first Gemara, he says only Ra and Yafa. All the Gemaras that Rebbe quotes always says, that Rebbe said before, all the Gemaras always says Ra Yafa. That's the only Isser. And that's why he says, with Shabbos there's no Isser. That's fine. Sha Isser Rak Litre Min Ra Yafa, only from the Ra and the Yafa. So what do we do with this? So here the Rebbe says, clearly in the Gemara is the Isser only Ra and the Yafa. But on the other hand, we see in the Mishnah that there's an Isser even to give the Ra and the Ra, that not only the Ra and the Yafa. How are we going to resolve it? The Rebbe is going to resolve it by distinction, to make a distinction between what the obligation is. Over there always has to be, even the obligation is to bring the best, the Mufchar. But the Isser is only the Ra and the Yafa, as we'll continue to learn now in Ois Dalet. Ois Dalet. So the Rebbe says, "V'lochein mistaber loimer," and therefore the Rebbe says it's logical to say. So the Rebbe says that v'lochein mistaber loimer. So therefore it makes sense to say, Nois Dalet Shalishita Hashas, that according to the view, what is the Talmud, the Gemara's view? Which in every place it always specifically says from the bad on the good. But on the other hand, on the other hand, as mentioned earlier, is very clear that you need to separate from the good on the bad, not only not doing the bad, but you need to, even over the bad, you need to have good. But from here, but Rad wouldn't matter. That would be okay. Yesh chiluk bein hachiyuv. Yesh chiluk bein hachiyuv ba'isur mitzvah sasei v'lo saseh. There is a chiluk between the mitzvah saseh and lo saseh. That's the way we're going to reconcile all of these seemingly contradictions. Rebbe explains, the obligation, what is the mitzvah sesa to beginning? Uli hidur, perfection, to give separation from the good. That would include to give from the good over the bad. Within the office, you do the best of the office. But the prohibition, when you're not separating from the best, that's only when you were separating from the bad on the good. That's when there is the isur, the prohibition. That's when you carry the sin. If you're just lacking that perfection to take from the yofa min hamufchar, there is no sin over there. So what's the difference? The distinction comes in the languages of the pasuk. By the isur loisa, it says, "Loisisu olav chet barimchem as chel b'mimenu." That you don't have a sin when you raise chel b'mimenu. Shapashta kosuv hu, the pasuk of the pasuk is shanisha b'menu einu chel b'y. Chel b'y you took away, and there's no more chel b'y over there. B'hainu shetzorich liyos havrosha min hayofa al hara. That there has to be the separation from the good on the bad. So there should be only there should be no chelbei left over there. So there has to be the separation from the yafa on the raw, because the yafa is gone, because you separated it, but not the other way around. Min hara la yafa. But when it talks about the obligation, the asset to separate from the yafa nemar, gam over there said kol chel b'stam. Doesn't say mimenu kol chel yitzar. Terumah b'chlal tzarich liyas tamid min hachel v'amuchar should always be from the chel v'amuchar. That's why the asset should always be, but the leisas is only when, if it's chel b'mimenu, that you have removed, but the raw yafa al not raw ala yafa, and that's the only time we have the sin. But the asay is in general. But according to the Sifrei, the prohibition is not just to separate from the raw to the yafa. Elagam min amuchar. He doesn't give from the muchar. That's also a isur. Harihu b'nesiyas and it's also nesiyas oven. Then, not like the Gemara that only min hara ela yofe is a chet. V'zu gam shitus Rambam, and this is also the Rambam's view. Sheshino meloshna Mishnah. He changes from the language of the Mishnah. The Rambam says, "Komokim shesh koyim Torah min hayofe." Wherever there's a koyin, the Torah min hayofe. Also, v'koysev he writes, "Ein Torah min ela min hayofe." Only min hayofe. Shenema barimchem eschad b'mimenu. So you only do the good. Sheyesh the farish kavanosei shehachi litrim min hayofe ein rak hidur mitzvah. That we have to is not just a hidur mitzvah. El sheyesh isur litrim shalei min hamuvchar ein termim ela min hayofe, which means you're not allowed to. Kloshina Sifrei anashli termim oisel min hamuvchar. The Rambam is aligned with the Sifrei that even min hamuvchar it's already isur, and Bashekin, according to the Shas, the isur is only if you do it min haro ala yofe, and the esa the Rebbe says is even a chiyuv, even in from the yofe, not only the raw. In any case, you always have to give the mufcha. Hey, v'yashloimar sheshnei farim elu. These two ways, whether we say if you separate it and you don't take the mufchar, are you still a sin, like the Sifrei says, or like the Shas? That depends on what is the definition. Why do we have to go from the yofer? The end of the laws of Isur Mizbech, the Rambam writes, one who wants to merit for himself, Yaakov Yitzre Hara, he should subdue his evil inclination. He widen his hand. He should bring a korban from the best, the praiseworthiest of all the korbanos. He says everything. The Rebbe stresses the holdover means everything. Whatever is for Hashem. It needs to be from the beautiful and the good. If he builds a house for davening, a shul, it should be more beautiful than the house where he lives in. If he sanctifies something, he should sanctify the most beautiful of his assets. And that's why the pasuk also says, everything fatty, the best, give to Hashem. So we can investigate, question the Chakira, the Terumah min hayofe, whether the obligation of Terumah to give from the best, as we say, Barim Chavaschel B'Mimenu, Einei Elo Prat Machiv HaKloli, is this only a detail of the general obligation, the Kol Chel Hashem. Everything best goes to Hashem. Or this is a special halacha for Terumah. We can say this is the argument between the Gemara and the Sifrei. According to the view of the Shas, this obligation is only a detail of the general halacha. Kol Chel Hashem. So a korban, a terumah, is just like everything. That's why we can't say when you're not fulfilling it, then you're doing a sin, because this is always a hidur. That general halach is only a perfection. As the Rambam says, you want to merit for yourself. As the Rambam writes there. That's why the Gemara holds, only if you do from the bad to the good, that's a step lower, then that's a sin. Then it's a degrading of the Terumah. What's left over of the Terumah is beautiful. The Hamatira Sashirayim, that permits the Shirayim, that's secondary, that's not as important. Himinara, that's from the Rad, that's not allowed. That's the way. Shekin l'shita Sifrei, as opposed to the shita of the Sifrei, she'adin the barim chamaschel b'memenu, udin miyuchad b'truma. That you have to separate the best from the korban is a special din in truma. Move on. It's understood. It's a complete obligation to give from the best. When you don't do from the best, you carry the sin. So any part, because it's a totally separate issue, it's not part of the general hidur, and therefore you are always going to be a sin, even if you don't do from the Ra and the Yafa, you just don't do mufchar, that's already Nisiyas Chay. Bob, oid. And perhaps we could say more. Ubahagdin pluktas Tanakama v'Rab Yehuda Hanal Reshiv Beis, by introducing again the disagreement with Tanakama Rab Yehuda that was mentioned earlier in the beginning of Sibbeis. So the Rebbe brought down from the Mishnah in Trumas, im kshein koyin Truma, when there is no im kshein koyin, when there's no koyin, termin min hamiskayim. So according to the Tanakama, you do from what lasts, because the coin is not here. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you'll always give from the yafa even when there's no coin. Sheyesh levayir, so we can explain the pligi. What is the machlokes here? Im achiv litre min hayofa, was the obligation to do yafa hu t'nai b'hafrosha. is that a condition when you separate? It needs to be yofa. Or it's a condition to give it to the kohen. You have to give the kohen the best. Rabbi Yehuda Asoiver Shaloilum Terumah Min HaYofa Gam Kshein Miskayim. He holds Rabbi Yehuda opinion that you give it from the yofa even though it's not going to last. Time is reason kichiyu zeh havidim b'afrosh hatruma. This is a din in separating of the truma. Ki toichen in afrosh truma hu hafrosh labaye, because the separation of truma is for Hashem. You separate for Hashem. It's not connected to the kohen. It is for Hashem that you have to give the best. Kiloshna kosuf kol chaylev yitzur goymer sheyitnu laHashem l'chonisati. Whatever yitzur that you give to Hashem, He gives it to them. He gives it to the kohen. But this is really for Hashem. Kein torimu gam atem trumas laHashem. So the pasuk says you separate for Hashem. It's for Hashem, but then later you give it to the kohen. Therefore, on the separation itself, there is an obligation to be from the best. Similar, we say that every chaylev to Hashem. For that reason, Rabbi Yehuda holds, even though it's not going to last, so why give the best? We don't worry about the loss of the kohen. Why? Because the main thing that the separation to Hashem should be from the beautiful one, from the better one. So that's why we don't care that it's not going to last. As opposed to Nakama holds, the reason you give beautiful should be for the kohen. That the giving to him should be from the best. So that the supplying of his needs through the Yidden should be in the best way. From the best and the chosen. So in this case, if the yofa is not going to last, so we need to make to the kohen. So you come first, goes to the kohen. That's what the Tanakama holds. So based on this, we can say Shashai lahanal. The above question that we were talking about, whether the obligation to separate mufchar whether it's part of this general obligation of everything needs to be to Hashem. So this is part. Terumah is part of everything. Tolu begeder the kol chaylev Hashem. That hinges on what is the definition of chaylev Hashem. But when we say all the time chaylev Hashem, the Hinin is Bayer b'Mokom Achar. It's explained elsewhere. Bebiur Shitas HaRambam, explaining the view of the Rambam. Shlohevi hodi isna lefonu b'mitzvos. He did not bring that we have to do the mitzvahs. Shenilmed mizeh keli vanveyu, that we learn this is my God. I'll beautify him. He's not lefonu b'mitzvos. He doesn't mention it. El Rakadin. He only brings the halacha, the kol dover shul Hashem akel atoiv. Anything that is for Hashem. Min not specifically mitzvahs, but anything that you do for Hashem should be from the nice and the good. In Bona Beis Tefillah, he builds a house, a shul, Beis Shivos, it should be nicer than his home that he lives in. Higdish Dover, if he's Magdish, an item, Yagdish V'na Yofe, Shebe Nechosov, are the best of the assets. V'cheinu Eimer, Kol Chelev La'avayu Geven. Sha'akavona B'zeh, this is general, Sha'akavona B'zeh L'Dover, Shehu Doime L'Korban Al Gabe HaMizbeach. So here, his intention is items which are similar to a korban that he brings in the Mizbeach. You bring a korban LaHashem. Everything is LaHashem, is like a korban, because a korban is for Hashem. Shemoiser is adover LaHashem. You give it over to Hashem. Kimei bona beis tefillah. Give it to, make it for Hashem. Higdish dover. V'gam the Moiser b'Rambam shom the hechil rov chulukis orim, that he fed the hungry one. He covered the one who doesn't have clothes on. That's for an atonement. So it's all for Hashem. Over there, you need it to be from the beautiful nechosim. Because the object the object, what you're doing something from Hashem. You're bringing a korban, you're building a house, you're giving tzedakah to be a kapora. Because that is important to the object. Because since this matter is beautiful, so then bringing it to Hashem, it's more complete and more perfect. So now we understand also clearly, it's explained the view of the Rambam in our case. That the Rambam says you always have to give Terumah and Ayofa. Since the halacha is like the Tanakama. If there's no kohen, you would give from the thing that lasts. That it lasts, so it means that it's mainly in Terumah. I mean that it's a din in the kohen, because that's why we take into consideration that it's lasting. Nimtzo she'ein dizeh shayich lechiv hakloli dekol chelu v'avayit. Then it turns out that this is not connected to the general deal chol chelu v'avayit. Shezehu rak b'chol davar shel l'shem hakel. That's only something which is for Hashem, as the Rambam says, like the korban. V'lochein sfila the Rambam. That's what the Rambam holds. Shezehu din chodosh. This is a new halacha. Umiyuchad gab afroshes truma, and specific for separating the truma. Shetzrichin losis lakoyim and ayofa. We have to give to the kohen from the yuf. V'kivon shezehu din miyuchad betruma. Since this is a special halacha in truma, svirele gamkein she'ein rak hidur lechatchila. That's why he says this is a chiluk only lechatchila. It's not only because it's not part of the other. The other, if it's part of everything, it's a hidur. But that's why all this ein rak hidur lechatchila. It's not just not a hidur lechatchila. Elodim ein mekayim dim zeh yesh b'nisiyas oven. If you don't mekayim this halacha, there is carrying a sin. Kishitas hasifri, like the Sifrei says. L'chein kosav ein torim min el min hayofa kenal. That's why he writes ein torim min el min hayofa kenal, that always, it's not only Ra ala Yofa, but always you have to give the Yofa. As opposed to the view of the Gemara. It's not one of the mitzvos. That there is a perfection mitzvah, all mitzvahs, to make always beautiful. It doesn't make a difference, like in the Rambam, that only by a korban is la Hashem, but it's always the same. That the chiv litron min hayofa rak prat b'chiv hakloli, the hidur mitzvah. It's a detail in the general obligation of a hidur mitzvah v'kol chelu v'Hashem. V'lochein yefshel loymar shebeglal zeh she'eino min hadrin tiv as a sichot. That's why you can't say, because he's not from those who do it perfect. It's carrying the sin. Zayin. There's additional change. The language of the Sifrei and Lashon Shas. The B'shas Lashon v'im ein kodesh nisiyas chet lama. If it's not going to become kodesh, so why would there be carrying of a sin? Why would there be a sin? Like the Pasuk said not to carry a sin. Avo b'Sifrei Mishana v'Aimer of the occasion says she'enom b'nisiyas oven. Not this oven. We know that an oven is greater, more intentional than a chet, which is accidental. So we said before that this oven, that there is already nisiyas oven over there. Hurak Betrumah, that's only by Terumah. Yesh lilmud mezel gam legabi shar mitzvos haTorah hachomer k'shechoseh b'dim mitzvah. We can learn the stringency if you're lacking from the din by Terumah over there, missing the hidur, it becomes a chet. Although we can't obligate him and force him to do, if he's not perfected mitzvahs, it's not just that he's lacking the advantage of the mitzvah. It's like carrying a sin. There is a chesor in the mitzvah itself. when you're Mekayim mitzvah Hidar and Neisraf ala schar avor hidur mitzvah yeshesofa b'schorosh la mitzvah atzma. In addition, for schar for a hidur mitzvah, but there is in the mitzvah itself, and that's the language of the Sifrei that the Siyas Ovin. We learn from it that it's a very serious all the time. That this is only by Terumah, but yet tells us how much of a problem it is when you don't do it behidur, and from this we understand how beneficial and how the important it is the hidur mitzvah. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Korach, Tavshin Chav Dalet, Chav Menachem of Tavshin Memhei. I read through the last part of the Sikha due to some restraints in time that I needed to finish. So I have to go it over again. I think it's very clear, but it's a very, probably, I would say, one of the most difficult Nigla Sichas that I have taught in the meantime. But hopefully we did some justice to it and have to review this again.